Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? It's very interesting. I've been kind of trying to break this down. So, for anybody watching this video in the future, it is after Election Day, and Donald Trump won his second presidency. So, this is just for historical record. And my social media people or friends on social media have had a very wide array of reactions, and it's fascinating to watch. I've reached a point now where whether or not it was an outcome that I wanted or not, and that's true. There were some outcomes from the election that I was very happy about. Some of the outcomes I was like, well, that didn't go my way. But I'm kind of the point that I'm very dispassionate about it. I'm not sure if that means that I've just gotten to the point where I'm so old that I don't care anymore. I hope that you all never reach that age that you lose their passion for things that I have. I'm just kind of like I'm just gonna move on because for everybody else, this is the day after election day. For me, it's Wednesday. Yeah, so yeah. Maybe that's the best way to approach it. But hopefully, you had things that you got good or that were good for you after your election day yesterday. If there were things that were unfortunate, I'm sorry, but that's just the way life is. We don't always get what we want. I learned that at a very young age that I don't always get what I want. It's like telling my mother, I want the chocolate bar for dessert. She says, you can't have that for your dinner. I'm really rambling now, guys. Sorry about that. Okay. So before we get started, I do want to talk about something that I noticed on some of the assignments I'm going to turn in. This is for the Ultrix assignments. I've been asking for screen captures, and everybody's been doing screen captures fine, but I've noticed that there have been some submissions that people have been doing screen captures with what appears to be their phone. And I do want to talk about that because and it's not really a major issue, but it's so much easier to do a screen capture just using the computer. So if you were using your phone, just real quick, I want to show you how do we do a screen capture, and this is going to be relevant for future assignments. I would like to look a little bit more professional, particularly data science, of course. There are two ways that I go about it, and there may be multiple ways, but the first one is just using something called snipping tool, which you can find here in your Windows search. And basically all there is to it is that whenever you want to do a screen capture, you go where you want the screen capture, you click new, and voila, there you go. You can select what it is you want on the screen, and you can basically, it automatically copies that, and you can paste that into whatever source document you want. Okay. There are situations where that will not work, and so I wanted to kind of talk about the longhand method. And I've never done it on this computer before, so apologize, it'll take me a second. But that's basically the print screen. And the way that I do print screen stuff, I usually open the paint tool, and then whatever it is that I'm trying to capture, I have open. I hit the print screen key. I need to see. Yep, okay. So hit print screen, then you paste it into the paint tool, and then you can use the select tool to select whatever it is that you need to capture. And then Control C, Control V it. And so, yeah. I put that in the syllabus that I wanted people to do screen captures. I never really talked about how to do that, but if you're one of those people who are using that, that's please start thinking on that. Yes.
You can also press Windows Shift S.
Windows Shift S. A new one. Okay.
So that quickly it automatically pulls up.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. And then just copies it to your.
And it draws the shape, so basically it's like screen or the snipping tool. Yeah. Okay. Well, I learned something too today. So that's three different ways we can go about this. That's three different ways we can go about it. Yeah. Whatever works best for you, just make sure you start using that moving forward. And that'll be helpful for you, not just in this class, but other classes in aggregate. All right. Today we're going to be talking about cryptocurrency. So talking to students on Monday about the topic, there was a wide variety of perceptions on this about what was going on with cryptocurrency. I found out some of you actively engage in trading cryptocurrency, and then some of you are just like, I would not spend any money on worth it whatsoever. So different perspectives on this. This much like the election stuff I was talking about, I try to keep an open mind about things and try taking multiple perspectives. I don't have an active amount of cryptocurrency in my investment portfolio, though I do know that my investment manager does hedge that on some positions. How they actually operate that within my investing, I don't know. It's beyond me, but I don't actively engage in investing in cryptocurrency. I think it's more interesting to talk about cryptocurrency from an accounting perspective, because this is one of those things that's going to become far more prominent over time. I believe after the election yesterday, they were talking about what the effects were on crypto stocks, and there's the crypto prices have actually increased pretty substantially over the past 24 hours. Dogecoin increased by 12%, okay, which we'll talk about Dogecoin. Dogecoin is hilarious. But yeah, there's certainly some concerns when we talk about cryptocurrency from an accounting perspective. But in the past, I really just talked about cryptocurrency from the accounting perspective. But recently, I learned a little bit about how cryptocurrency just originated. And for those of you who were in my AIS class last year, for those of you who were in AIS class like 2 years ago, we didn't talk about it in that class. But if you were in AIS class last year, I talked a little bit about this in that course. It was originally started by a white paper by a gentleman, I say gentleman, we don't know who it is, an individual named Satoshi Nakamoto. And the reason I say Satoshi Nakamoto is that was a pseudonym, and the person has not been identified. It's actually interesting. The BBC recently published an article about somebody who claimed to be Satoshi Nakamoto, but could not actually provide evidence to prove that they were. So there's a lot of people who've been claimed that they are Satoshi Nakamoto and said, no, I'm not that individual. And a lot of people who said, I am that individual, and it's been proven that they're not. So the hunt goes on of who this person is, which is interesting because Satoshi Nakamoto has rights to 1 million Bitcoin right now, okay, which is a substantial sum of money, a very substantial sum of money, if they claim it. And so that's probably why a lot of people are like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, yeah. So the idea behind that is that this was shortly after the financial crisis had begun, and everybody was really, really down on financial institutions and banks and said, why don't we have exchange systems that do not involve intermediaries? And that was kind of the impetus behind this, is to actually conduct exchanges that occurred peer-to-peer instead of using these banks or these financial institutions as middlemen. And that kind of idea gained traction. And so Bitcoin is kind of acknowledged as the first crypto asset, cryptocurrency. And it's the Bitcoin peer-to-peer exchange, I believe is the name of the white paper. But it kind of operated on this idea of using a distributed ledger, which we're all accountants in this room. We know what a ledger is, just a series of transactions. But a distributed ledger, which basically means everybody has a copy of it and they may update simultaneously to record transactions. Now, I may say, that sounds really boring, Dr. Barnes. It is, okay? It is. It's fascinatingly boring. So how did accounting tool become something that started generating this multi-trillion-dollar industry, okay? It's because the market cap on Bitcoin, I believe, or not Bitcoin, on crypto right now, they say it's a $2 trillion industry. If you can call it an industry, because they'll avoid the definition. But assuming that we do, yeah, $2 trillion of transactions, which is just a normally large amount. So how did an accounting tool become that? And the answer is that they were trying to figure out a way for these transactions to take place, but to validate transactions. And the validation was the real challenge, because you've got a whole bunch of different systems that are all receiving these transactions, and who's to tell which are the correct transactions and which are the erroneous transactions? They wanted to have a method of validating transactions. And what ended up happening is they said, well, how about we pay somebody to validate transactions for us? And the payment scheme is the cryptocurrency itself. So the cryptocurrency by means of exchange is how they exchange within the system. So like if you talk about a Bitcoin blockchain, they would conduct transactions using Bitcoin, but the validation would also award people Bitcoin, which is how they increase Bitcoin into circulation. And that was kind of a fascinating approach. Now, I think everybody's already familiar with this. This is what I actually asked you to watch with respect to that video. There's a little bit more to it than that, but it goes on to it. But so I asked you to do a brief summary of the cryptography process. And that was kind of the goal of that, is to actually get you to understand that this is kind of a series of exchanges and transactions on a system. And the validation process is what makes this work, is what makes this process able to work. And I heard some people talking about this, the interesting transactions and why this works the way it is. It's fascinating. It's something so complex and so nuanced that it's nothing I would ever come up with, but it fascinates me to how that operates. So with that, I wanted to move on to the group questions. And so there's a lot more to it than that. We could talk about encryption. We could talk about solving the equation, which is basically cryptographic hash functions and trying to set everything equal to 0 based on the cryptographic value. That's well beyond the scope of what I really want to talk about. And if that fascinates you, great. I mean, this is something where there's a lack of knowledge in there. It's a massive amount of interest in crypto assets, but not a lot of real understanding about how cryptography and how blockchain systems work. So if you gain knowledge in that area, that's great because that will give you an edge over other people. But I did want to talk a little bit about kind of the root fundamentals of this and go into a little bit more detail on this. So based on what you learned from the cryptography video, speculate on how a blockchain system may answer some inherent problems in accounting, such as transaction authorization, disaggregated record keeping, financial statement manipulation. And I'm going to start with group number 1 on this one. So Megan, that's your group. What did your group come up with on this one?
We did it help to prevent unauthorized transactions because it ensures that they're properly authorized by individuals with the correct keys.
Okay. So at a basic level, transaction authorization is kind of a foregone conclusion because everybody has the same system. Everybody has the same ledger that they share. And when a transaction goes onto the system, they have to achieve consensus. So if a false transaction goes on there, so say for example, I'm trying to steal Tyler's money, and I say, okay, Tyler owes me 1 million Bitcoin. Put it on there. Tyler's going to say, no, wait a minute, that didn't actually happen. Okay, and somebody else has said, yeah, I talked to Tyler, that never actually happened. So consensus was really important. So consensus has to be achieved, and once it's actually achieved, then everybody has knowledge of that particular transaction. It's also important to note that this solves the problem with disaggregated record keeping because it does update synchronously, simultaneously when that transaction achieves consensus. So if we agree to that transaction, which I'm assuming we agreed to it because you didn't say anything bad about it. So you owe me 1 billion Bitcoin now, Tyler. Okay, all right. You're gonna have to become Satoshi Nakamoto. Yeah. So yeah, if we have this disaggregated record keeping is no longer an issue because everybody has a record of that particular transaction. And it's really, really hard to change that because once the block has achieved consensus, then it's going to be proof, or there's going to be proof of work provided later on, and then that is the new basis for the system. It's a little bit like the analogy that I have, and it's really, really hard to kind of to make a good analogy because this is so unlike anything that we achieve in accounting. But think about a financial statement fraud. If you're manipulating accounts receivable, if you're trying to manipulate an accounts receivable and keep that going into the future, you do it in year 1 and it affects the year 1 balance sheet. But that new balance sheet is the basis for the fraud. So if you're going to continue doing it for year 2, you have to manipulate that in year 2. Then you have to do it again in year 3. They just don't reverse naturally, automatically. Most frauds don't. So you have to continue manipulating that over time. The same idea holds true for manipulating blocks in a blockchain. If you're trying to put a transaction on there that's erroneous or fraudulent, then you have to continue maintaining that, which is really problematic in this situation because in a financial statement scenario, you're the one who's maintaining those financial statements. In a blockchain scenario, there are multiple people on the system who are all maintaining the records right along with you. So you're competing against thousands of other individuals trying to maintain those records. So it's a much bigger challenge, which is why a lot of people have said fraud is not possible on a blockchain. I don't know that that's an accurate statement. I still think it's a possibility, but I do think it's going to be minimized in that regard. But there are some practical issues in integrating blockchain ledger systems and ERP systems. So what are those? Let's go with Matt B.
So errors can be embedded in the blockchain and cannot be undone, and then the blockchain takes a lot of computation power.
Yes, so there are definitely problems. If an error occurs in the blockchain, then it's going to basically roll forward. It's not something that can be corrected by one individual. It has to be achieved by consensus, and that's something that's certainly problematic. There's definitely some energy usage issues. Blockchains tend to be, because since they're distributed ledgers, they are on multiple systems simultaneously, and they're going to be updated simultaneously. All of those systems are using power. Plus, the mining process itself is going to be using a lot of power. That's one of the things that's been a very big concern from an environmental perspective is the concerns about crypto mining using so much energy and so much power. And that paired with the concerns about AI, which we're going to talk about here in a couple of weeks, there's a lot of demand now for additional power for these data centers that are trying to perform these processing tasks. So yeah, certainly some concerns in that area. We'll talk a little bit more about kind of the integration with ERP systems because it's not an easy integration. It's not straightforward. That being good because the reason behind that being that ERP systems tend to be isolated in one location. They tend to be centralized, whereas we know blockchain systems are disaggregated. By their very nature, they're different. And so trying to integrate them in tasks and perform the same routines is just going to be a very big challenge moving forward. So hopefully everybody note that I used a blog called TaxBit. Okay, this is my olive branch. Okay, but I did think this blog was interesting. So it highlights an issue in accounting for cryptocurrency that does not fall cleanly into any single account type. All right. So it talks about two account types. I'm going to talk about a third one, and then we're going to highlight a fourth one, which is not even mentioned. These are all account types that have all been addressed with respect to how crypto assets and cryptocurrency should be treated. So briefly explain why cryptocurrency cannot be recorded as cash or cash equivalents or intangible assets. So let's start with cash and cash equivalents. Matt F., what did your group say about the problems with recording cryptocurrency as cash and cash equivalents?
Well, so cash and cash equivalents are, well, cash is the most liquid asset you can own. You can pay for stuff right now with it. A cash equivalent is usually something that it's a dead instrument that matures usually within about 3 months of ownership. Well, crypto, it matures whenever you decide for it to mature, but you also can't. I mean, some places will take crypto payments. You can pay for some things with the coin you own, but usually you have to convert it to cash first. But it doesn't mature, so it's not a cash equivalent.
Yeah. So it doesn't really meet the definitions of either one. I think ultimately, if we talk about crypto exchanges, there are some transactions that occur outside of individual blockchains. So we talk about Bitcoin now. Bitcoin is no longer just isolated to a single blockchain. It's more kind of a public. It's on a public block now that can be traded between parties. So it could be viewed as a currency to some degree, but for the most part, cryptocurrencies are not viewed as legal tender by most countries in the world. They're still the legal tender basis is still going to be the basis for which that country has the currency that they've established. Something also that's interesting, we've talked about it. Cash and cash equivalents are characterized by a lack of fluctuation in value. Basically, the reason we use the term cash equivalents is that you can convert that into cash without a significant change in value. Crypto assets and cryptocurrencies in general, they genuinely do not meet that definition. They have massive fluctuations in value, a lot of volatility over short windows of time. So it's very, very hard to get them to characterize them as that. So the other one that they talked about in the article, the one that I hate the most, okay, the one that I just dislike the most as far as the perspective take, is going to be intangible assets. Okay, so intangible asset was another argument. What was one of the arguments for against using as an intangible asset? Kirsten, what'd your group say on this one?
Yeah, so we also talked about the value of the currency always being like changing and in flux. And so we said the problem was that they have to recognize the loss, but then can't recognize the gain.
Yes. That's basically the crux of it, is that intangible assets, we know that intangible assets, we can actually adjust value, but what direction can we adjust value for intangible assets? Down only, okay? Tangible asset accounting does not allow for upgrades in fair value or increases in fair value. It says if there's an impairment, we can adjust for that, but we can't actually make an adjustment upwards, which seems to be a big problem because if it's heavily volatile, then basically it's like bouncing across on a ceiling, and then the ceiling just kind of gets lower and lower over time, and there's going to be natural degradation in value, which is not the true value because these crypto assets are going up and down and usually kind of upward trending. So intangible assets don't really meet that protocol. Now, I do want to spoil something. I meant to look it up before class and I completely forgot, but I will tell you right now, FASB has released, this was actually last year, December 2023, they released a standard on this, and I don't remember the name of the standard, or the number of the standard, but it actually was a pronouncement about how to treat crypto assets, or cryptocurrency specifically, from an accounting perspective. And their answer was to treat it as an intangible asset, which you're saying, we just talked about why that won't work, Dr. Barnes. And the caveat is that it's an intangible asset that can be upgraded to fair value, that it can be actually adjusted for fair value changes, which doesn't sound like an intangible asset at all. I'm just like, why didn't they treat it as an investment? But that was their answer. It's an intangible asset, but it does have characteristics of investment, so you can adjust it to fair value. So that's ultimately going to be our conclusion, by the way. And I know that's a spoiler. I probably should have waited for that to the conclusion because everybody's really excited about this story. But yeah, That's where we're at, is that we're currently operating under the paradigm that it is an intangible asset. That's how we treat crypto assets and cryptocurrencies. But I do want to talk about that. I mentioned earlier, why don't we characterize this as an investment? Okay, this is not something I asked you to think or to answer, but it seems like a lot of people treat cryptocurrencies and crypto assets in general as investments. Can we say that that's kind of a characteristic of a lot of these? Heard about, I'm so invested in cryptocurrency. It's like, yeah, but is it really an investment? I mean, in some regards, it should be, okay? But the question is that the name itself of cryptocurrency seems to imply that it's not an investment. Because think about it, there's not a whole lot of traction or a whole lot of support for people changing other currencies. Like you don't go buying a whole bunch of Japanese yen at one price and going to a currency trader down the street and selling it at another price. And if you do, there are probably very, very minor fluctuations and changes. So that's not something that we traditionally do with currencies. We don't treat it like an investment. That being said, is it truly a currency? And that's another question that we have to come up with an answer to, because that is also a problem. Because as we've defined, currencies don't have that massive fluctuation of value. So is it an investment? Maybe. Is it currency? Maybe. We don't have a conclusion for that. I do think that out of our three choices that we've talked about right here, that for the most part, it probably meets the characteristic of an investment more cleanly than it meets the other two. That's kind of the conclusion that I came up with. That is my opinion. I am happy to be wrong about that, or happy to have people disagree with that. But it is one of those things that's very heavily subjective, hence the reason we're talking about it. So tax law mentions that cryptocurrency can be exchanged as a medium exchange, so currency and transaction as a result of crypto mining activities. Given that you represent types of business activities, should the accounting for cryptocurrency depend on how the currency was obtained? Okay. Maddie, what did your group say on this one?
We said no, that it shouldn't depend on how it was obtained, because like in the article, I'm pretty sure it said that the accounting is similar to other income generating activities.
Mm-hmm.
That's at least what we found.
Yeah, so the accounting, for the most part, we tend to think of transactions that involve cryptocurrency as being income generating activities. Now, the reason I chose a specific example is that if we're talking about a medium exchange, is that an income generating activity? Well, the transaction itself may be a generating activity, like what it is you're exchanging, but the crypto asset itself is being used as cash in that particular scenario, or as a proxy for cash. So using it as a currency becomes problematic because it doesn't actually generate any value. It's not, the transaction does generate value, but the crypto itself does not generate value. There is another interesting point. Crypto mining activities. Let's talk about this with respect. We talked about how mining takes place. Mining is the validation of the block. And when you're the first party to validate the block, you get awarded a share of cryptocurrency. And this is a declining amount over time, but for the most part, people are still finding that it has value because the value of cryptocurrencies go up over time. So if that's the case, what does this sound like to you guys? And can we come up with an analogy on this one? So let's think about the term mining. All right. If I were to actually go mining for a natural resource, okay, like I own a piece of land and I go mining for gold, or I'm mining for diamonds, how would I characterize anything that I found? So it's kind of that's a little bit dicey, but for the most part, if I said that I'm going to generate revenues from whatever I found, it's probably going to be characterized as some kind of inventory. Okay. Now, there's a little bit of argument there. You could say, well, that's not really inventory because it's more of a means of exchange. It's more of a commodity. And I agree with that. But at the very general level, we could say this is inventory. So now we have a fourth possibility, okay? We have cash and cash equivalents. We've got intangible assets. We got investments. We got inventory. And which one of these does cryptocurrency most closely emulate? And the answer probably is, it depends on the nature of the transaction. It depends on the nature of the acquisition method, and depends on the nature of the transaction. If it's part of a crypto mining activity, then we're talking about inventory. We're talking about as a medium exchange, that's probably like cash and cash equivalents. We're talking about investing and holding. We're talking about investments. So certainly some problems with respect to that. So this actually comes up to the problem is, what are some issues with accounting for cryptocurrency based on acquisition method, is that there are different acquisition methods. And so we would have the same items being exchanged, or we could feasibly have the same items being exchanged and being treated for such different ways in in the financial statements. Now, this kind of leads to an interesting question. This leads to an interesting question. So the question I have is, hold on, let me make sure I'm doing this right. All right, yeah, so the question number 5 says that identifies the type of cryptocurrency transactions that are and are not taxable events, okay? So are not taxable events, what have we got? We've got acquisition through exchange or cryptocurrency. So cryptocurrency used as a medium of exchange, all right? Not a taxable event. That would be like saying, all right, I'm paying in cash. I said, well, I've got to pay you, I've got to tax you on that cash. That's not something that happens when you go into the real world. You don't go to Walmart, you don't pay $2 for something and they say, all right, that'll be 2 cents for using $2 worth of cash. So currency exchange is not taxable events, all right? Inventory, that would be something mined or purchased for resale. That would result in ordinary income. Investments, that would be treated as capital gains as losses, okay? So there are different ways that we would recognize taxes depending on acquisition method. The interesting question is that it says, what does this inconsistency imply about the nature and identity of cryptocurrency? And currently, we've already established the fact that we don't know what the answer is. We don't know what the perfect solution is. FASB has settled on the solution that it's going to be intangible asset with changes to value. That's their solution, which ultimately speaking, I think that we could argue about this until we're blue in the face and not come up with the answer. But the more important question is that if I acquire cryptocurrency through one method, does that mean I have to actually utilize it as that same method? So if I acquire cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange, can I only use cryptocurrency as a medium of exchange in the future? Absolutely not. The answer is no, okay? So let's say that somebody buys a pizza off of me gives me 10 Bitcoin, which that's actually a ridiculously expensive pizza, but that was actually the first cryptocurrency exchange. That I don't remember how many Bitcoin it was, but for Papa John's pizza, 2 Papa John's pizzas for some absurd amount of Bitcoin, and which would now be worth millions of dollars. So that was the most expensive pizza transaction in history. But yeah, you obtain these Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, and then you hold on to these Bitcoin and you sell them to another party that want to invest in it. Those legitimate transactions. Yeah, those are both legitimate transactions, but you will notice that cryptocurrency is treated differently in those 2 transactions. In one, it was treated as a currency. In another, it was treated as an investment. So just because we actually acquire cryptocurrency through one medium of exchange or through one process does not mean we can't use it through another process as well, which creates some problems because then we have to be consistent about accounting treatment simply because there's a bunch of different ways that we can acquire and we can trade cryptocurrencies. All right, moving forward. In the first Gizmodo piece, the author notes the Financial Asset Task Force has recommended more transparency in the identification of cryptocurrency users and greater government regulation of cryptocurrencies. Based on the discussion in this piece and some of the examples we've discussed in this course, what are some of the key arguments in favor of greater transparency and regulation? So I think we can ultimately argue that transparency is a good thing. Can we agree to that as an accounting class? Did anybody take all of their accounting courses and say, you know what, I am just not in favor of transparency? Because if you are, I need you to leave, okay? Okay. Now, transparency obviously very important for our profession. The question is, should this be achieved through regulation? And so we're going to have a couple of perspectives. The first perspective we're going to take is, yes, we need more regulation. This is really, really important. So what are some arguments for that? And Kyle, you got this responsibility. What would your group say on this one?
It would greatly reduce the risk of fraud and any criminal activities. The decentralized nature of crypto can harm consumers. So instead of like you putting money in a bank, you're putting money in a crypto that someone else kind of owns. So just with that, you can kind of see what's happening with the crypto, and it helps protect consumers and businesses.
Right. So yeah, one of the big concerns about crypto exchanges and something we talked about when we talked about cybersecurity is the nature of cryptocurrencies to actually facilitate criminal transactions. All right. So it would decrease the cryptocurrency use in criminal transactions and promote the ability to track these illicit transactions, hopefully, which would eliminate incentives for cybercrime. That would be one of the big goals in there. There's a lot of different areas we could talk about. Ransomware was one of those ones that we've already discussed. Did anybody follow the Binance ordeal that occurred last year? So we're going to talk about FTX, but Binance also had their hands slapped by the Department of Justice last year. They were accused of violating anti-money laundering provisions in the United States, and I believe they were fined. This number could be wrong, okay? I won't test you on this number, but it was something obscene. It was like $4 billion. I can't remember what the exact number was. It may have been more than that. I know it was in the billions, which was just a ridiculous amount of money. So that's the idea, is that we want to try to minimize the criminal impact. Also, as Kyle mentioned, holding decentralized, or DeFi, as they like, decentralized finance, DeFi parties a little bit more accountable. Having regulation would actually give us a little bit more identification of what those parties are doing, and they would have to be able to provide updates. They would have to provide information on their transaction activity so that we can actually understand what it is they're doing. So yeah, there's some arguments for regulation and some very good arguments. I think we can make a point. But because you all know that I believe in Desoy Logoi, then we have to actually to argue the other side. So what are some key arguments against greater transparency in the regulation of cryptocurrencies? Colin, you're up on this one.
Crypto is constantly evolving, therefore, like, any regulations might be ineffective and quickly outdated. And then also, regulating it undermines its core principle that was like originally created on, which is the fact that it's decentralized.
Yeah, and so one of the big attributes of having a decentralized exchange is that you can actually maintain privacy while actually managing that exchange. So definitely decrease privacy surrounding the transactions. I think the evolution is certainly problematic because it's really, really hard to establish how global regulations will work associated with that. So that regulation may actually impair the ability to actually maintain a global marketplace. And if they try to maintain regulations at the global level, it's not certain that they'd be effective. Cryptocurrencies have been around for, I want to say about, I guess we talk about 2008 when the white paper started, then we're talking about 15 years roughly. And we're only now just starting to see regulation. If that's the pace at which regulation actually maintains and updates to address the issue, then the issues that it's currently facing are going to be the regulations that are being passed are not going to address the current issues. One other one that I kind of threw in here, this is kind of one that I thought about, is that one of the goals of the crypto exchange is to actually kind of emulate the nature of cash as a very basic level. So I'm trying to think about the way to characterize this, but if you think about like a TV show or a movie where somebody's trying to maintain their protection of their identity, what is the one way they always operate? So they don't have credit cards, they generally don't have ID, all of their transactions are in cash. And that's basically what cryptocurrency was meant to emulate. It's actually supposed to emulate cash transactions, face-to-face cash transactions. So you don't actually have a third party involved in the process. That was the whole point of the intermediary. To that end, if that's the case, then we can actually make an argument that cryptocurrencies themselves are bearer instruments, which I think we've talked about bearer instruments in this class already before. What is a bearer instrument?
Who holds the instrument is entitled to.
Yeah, so if you possess the instrument, you own it, okay? Now, this is a little bit dicey to say that cryptocurrency is a bearer instrument because physical possession of cash basically implies ownership, whereas on a ledger, you actually have to be a party on that ledger to actually hold the cryptocurrency. To that end, though, it is the closest thing that we have to an electronic version of a bearer instrument, which I don't know that a lot of people would be willing to let go of for regulatory purposes. All right, so now we're going to talk about one of my favorite things. We're going to talk about FTX. Okay, so has anybody followed FTX? This actually, the whole FTX collapse occurred about 2 years ago. So yeah, Colin looks like followed that.
Have some project over it.
Okay, all right. So you got some familiarity. I actually, I say read, but you heard my spiel. I don't read anymore. I listen to books but I listened to Going Infinite by Michael Lewis, which Michael Lewis actually was the author of Moneyball. So you probably are familiar with that. You saw the movie with Brad Pitt. Yeah. He actually was author of the original book Moneyball, and he actually wrote a book about the FTX debacle. And the interesting thing about the book, I highly recommend it, by the way. That being said, he has a very biased perspective. He's very much an advocate for Sam Bankman-Fried, who is the owner of, or the operator of FTX, owner-operator. He's very much an advocate for him, and was kind of down on the regulators and the people who are trying to manage the operations. that being said, it's a very interesting perspective because he was writing the biography of Sam Bankman-Fried while the FTX collapse occurred. A whole story was supposed to be just a biography of this man who changed the foundations of cryptocurrency trading. And while this is going on, that's when the whole FTX collapse happened, and he was there in real time writing that. So it's a fascinating perspective. Anyway, so FTX basically started out as a cryptocurrency exchange, which kind of implies some very interesting issues in and of itself. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the nature of the cryptocurrency exchange. I meant to bring up the John Oliver video. Did anybody watch the John Oliver videos, by the way, that I put in the link? Okay, yeah. So there's actually a discussion in the second video about what FTX did. And the answer is they basically created their own currency. They used their currency to obtain loans of real value, and then they pumped up the value of their currency as collateral. So they basically started up a company, they made a fake currency, they traded for real currency, and then kind of just collapsed. And so that's in a nutshell how they're operated. And it's a little bit more integrated than that because FTX was an exchange company, but they actually had an investing company that was part of FTX called Alameda Research or Alameda Holdings. And so they were the ones who were holding these FTX currencies that were created and created a pretty much big debacle. So I don't want to go too much into the detail about the nature of the scandal itself, although it's fascinating. And the past couple of years, we've actually talked about the audit perspective of this in my seminar auditing class. So those of you who are going to be in that course, we may be talking about it again here in another few months as well. So stay tuned. Yeah, but with respect to the nature of FTX, one of the problems that they ran into is that people were utilizing this exchange pretty much as a bank, as a mechanism for exchange, the way they would use a traditional financial institution. Now let's go back to the origins of Bitcoin. What was the goal of Bitcoin in the first place? It was to create a decentralized ledger system that parties could make exchanges with one another without a financial intermediary. If I said FTX was a financial intermediary, would that be an accurate statement? I have no opinion, Dr. Barnes. No opinion. It's Wednesday and I'm tired. I stayed up late watching electric coverage. Yeah, okay. What do you guys think? Yes or no? Would it be fair to make that statement? All right, well, obviously no, not now because they're defunct, okay? But when they were in business, okay, maybe that was the problem. It's like FTX is no longer in business, Dr. Barnes. Well, it's not anything, okay? It's bankrupt. You're right, okay? My bad. When FTX was in business, could it be fair to say that they were a financial intermediary? I think that would make a fair statement. Does that defeat the purpose of cryptocurrencies? Certainly does, okay? Because the whole idea was that we were going to have this trustless exchange. We would not need to put trust in a third party, but now we've got this transaction exchange system that is a third party. And how well regulated do you think FTX was relative to banks or other financial institutions? Do you think their regulation was more severe or less severe? Less severe by a fair margin. There was almost no regulation on FTX. They were actually, Sam Bankman-Fried, who was the founder of FTX, he was actually making a play for regulation. And a lot of people make the argument that he was just doing that for transparency purposes, to try to make it look like he was a good guy and advocate when he actually was not. He was an interesting fellow. Again, like I said, that book, fascinating. If you have free time, which I know none of you do. Yeah, so this kind of interesting, at least to a point, okay? So if we're talking about a scenario where we've got a financial intermediary that is completely unregulated, what does that tell us about the need for regulation? Think about it this way. Let's say that you've got all your money in a bank and your bank is completely unregulated by the US government. How secure do you feel about your holdings then? Probably not. You might want to call right now. So FDIC insured? Are you sure? Okay, yeah. All right. If you did not have that regulation by the government, you probably would have a lot less security. That's effectively what FTX had, is they had no regulation, and people were putting massive amounts in there. And as it was, FTX was abusing that privilege. They were taking people's own investments and they were using them as they were using for other purposes, for their own purposes, for their own benefit, not for the benefit of employees. That was kind of why the whole FTX collapse occurred in the first place. Is that everybody said, look, I'm a little bit concerned the FTX is using my resources for their own purposes, their own assets. I'm withdrawing my money from FTX, and FTX said, oh. Give us a second, we'll get right back to you. And then they had such a massive run that they couldn't actually meet the obligations and they ended up folding as a result. So certainly a problematic scenario when there's no regulation, no oversight, there's no rules. There's no rules. And that created a big scenario. So then the question comes, I've obviously kind of led you down this road, and you're free to argue with me because I encourage you to encourage arguments, class. Does regulatory scrutiny of FTX provide additional justification for your response to questions 6 and 7? What do you guys think? Should we have more regulation of cryptocurrency exchanges and cryptocurrency transactions and mechanisms in the first place? Have I changed your mind on that? Did anybody come in this perspective saying, yeah, regulation's a bad idea, and then come in and say, well, Dr. Barnes makes a compelling argument, as he always does? Or is everybody still kind of like saying, this needs to be a free exchange, this needs to be a trustless exchange? That was the whole purpose in the first place. This is one of those things that I don't know that there's a clear indication. I'm willing to accept. I personally think that there needs to be a lot more regulatory scrutiny over this because this is a time bomb waiting to explode. There's certainly some problems in that. That being said, it's a little bit problematic because it defeats the whole purpose of which cryptocurrencies were originally intended, which is supposed to be exchanges without financial regulation or financial oversight. So there's not a good answer. The problem being is that as we see this integrated more and more in traditional business, as more and more businesses start accepting cryptocurrencies as their mechanisms for exchanges or for investing purposes, there's going to be more rules that are going to guide our profession. And that means there's going to be more need for regulation in the future. So on that happy note, I will go ahead and let you guys depart, and I'll see you all on Friday for, I guess, our last Ultrix assignment. So yeah, see y'all then.